And thanks for watching Morning Live. Now, the presidency says that last week's cabinet meeting resolved to reinstate the energy war room to deal with all energy challenges in the country. Government will also ensure that Eskom produces enough electricity to meet the country's needs while ascertaining governance and also leadership stability. Eskom has been grappling with a range of problems, including severe financial strain, which is exacerbated by its huge debt, inadequate maintenance program, poor procurement practices, and of course, leadership instability. Brian Molefe, who is the former Eskom CEO, who's been fingered in some of these allegations, joins us now to share his perspective as we look back on what went wrong at Eskom. Mr. Molefe, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Good morning.
So, firstly, looking at what's going on with Eskom at the moment.
Firstly, if I can ask, what are the allegations against me?
Well, if you look at some of the reports, the Treasury report for one, for example.
What does it say?
Where it says there needs to be, for example, an investigation into some of the things that went wrong regarding
Is that an allegation, Samir?
Well, it would be an allegation that there needs to be an investigation into certain things.
It's saying there's a need for an investigation is not an allegation.
So,
with respect, if we understand English. I'm still to understand what are the allegations against me. What is it that I have done wrong? What have I been accused of any unlawful actions? What are they?
Well, if we, I wasn't intending on starting there, but since we are there, let's go there. For example, if we look at some of what the Treasury report points to and some of the irregularities, fruitless and wasteful expenditure that happened at Eskom with regard to things like the Tegeta deal, for example, and how Eskom essentially almost funded Tegeta in that particular instance to the tune of 659 million rand.
And over again that the pre-funding was for coal. The coal was delivered. It was for the purchase of coal. The coal was delivered. There are audit reports at Eskom, both internal and external audit, that have audited the transaction. This innuendo that it was to fund Tegeta is something that is being peddled in the media.
Okay.
As far as I know, there is a prepayment agreement for the purchase of coal. The coal was delivered.
Let's break it down.
And it was, the transaction was audited.
Let's break it down. Was there a coal supply agreement between Eskom and Tegeta?
Yes.
And at the time when this payment was made, which colliery exactly was going to deliver that coal?
I think it was from the OCH, Optimum.
From Optimum.
And Rina, yeah.
And at the time of that transaction, did Tegeta own Optimum?
They may have. Optimum was under judicial management. What do they call it?
Business rescue.
Business rescue, yes.
Indeed, they were under business rescue. And at the time of that transaction, Tegeta did not own Optimum, which is what gave rise to some of these allegations that there was something untoward that may have happened there.
Let me tell you, when was the coal supply agreement signed? The coal supply agreement was signed in December when Exxaro, we did not renew Exxaro's contract because Exxaro wanted to renew their contract at 1,300 at the power station that they were supplying. Is it Tutuka? I think it's, it may be Tutuka, that they were supplying, right? So when the contract was not renewed, six suppliers were contracted to supply coal, and I think 9 actually, and in May only 3 of them were retained, and Optimum was one of them. So the contract was with the Optimum mine.
The contract was with Optimum mine, but
yes.
You paid Tegeta.
I did not pay Tegeta.
Eskom paid Tegeta.
Yes.
So you were the CEO of Eskom at the time. So when I'm saying you, I mean Eskom. So Eskom paid Tegeta. Now the question is, why would Eskom pay Tegeta, who did not own Optimum Mine, who were delivering the coal?
The question is, the payment was for coal, and the coal was delivered.
By whom?
By the mine.
Which is not Tegeta.
It was Optimum Mine.
Exactly.
Sakina, Optimum Mine is an entity on its own.
Yes, Mr. Molefe?
Yes.
And I perfectly understand that.
Yes, Optimum Mine is an entity.
Tegeta was in the process of acquiring Optimum Mine.
But
my point is that at the time when Eskom makes that payment of 659 million rand, the allegation now is that Tegeta did not own Optimum Mine, yet the payment was made to Optimum Mine, which then gives rise to all of these allegations that Eskom bent over backward to fund, as it were, Tegeta.
No, but what is wrong with my telling you that the payment was for coal and the coal was delivered?
So you see nothing untoward in
I don't
paying
see anything
an
untoward.
entity that you do not necessarily have, the contractual obligation with, because they were not the ones who were delivering the coal. Optimum was delivering the coal.
Yes, Optimum Mine was delivering the coal. The coal was paid for, and Optimum Mine delivered the coal. We don't know anything about the fact that the money was being used to buy shares. That had nothing to do with Eskom.
How did you not know? Because you had to have been aware.
It had nothing to do with Eskom. It was a transaction
I will tell you why I don't buy that, Mr. Molefe. I don't buy that because at the time when the Glencore agreement, when you, as Brian Molefe, enters the fray at Eskom, and they wanted to make an amendment to the contract, the coal supply agreement as Glencore, and you came in and you said, well, Eskom can't afford this. And frankly, I believe am I correct?
In saying what?
That you could not afford, as Eskom, to pay the price that the Glencore had suggested or that they wanted to renegotiate their contract on. Am I correct?
No, we couldn't afford it. And they were demanding that we should pay it at 530 at an additional 1.93 billion rand per annum for 3 years, which would be 6 billion rand. Eskom did not have the money.
And you were correct in saying Eskom did not have the money. I totally agree with you.
Yes.
And unlike most, I believe you were correct in your decision to say to Glencore no, because you were able to get the coal at a cheaper rate elsewhere.
Yes.
So I agree with you on that score. But with that said, I have to say that it would be very hard to believe that you were not aware of what was going on beyond that point regarding Tegeta,
I don't understand why you are sticking to the narrative that the payment was not for coal. It was for something else. I'm telling you that the payment was for coal. The coal was delivered and the transaction was audited. You're like somebody, I've just bought a Toyota Corolla and I paid for it and I got my car, the Toyota Corolla, and you're accusing me of having funded Toyota for some other nefarious activity. It's unfair, Sakina. It's not correct. It will never be right that you don't look at this transaction as the purchase of coal. It was a purchase of coal. The coal was delivered. The transaction was audited.
So why then did it raise all the alarm that it did?
Did it?
Yes, it did.
Oh,
it was
so tell me about that
again.
alarm. What was that alarm about? Because it also flabbergasted me.
So you do know about it. You do know that it was flagged because you say it flabbergasted you.
No, it was flagged. I know, and it flabbergasted me. But I don't understand why. Maybe you can explain why it was like that. I mean, was there a particular narrative that was being pursued that you are now also trying to push to say that we were funding Tegeta? It's not true.
Did
we were
Eskom
buying
not fund
coal.
Tegeta?
No, we bought coal. The coal was delivered.
What agreement did Eskom have in place with Tegeta at that point?
There was an agreement to supply the coal.
Agreement with Tegeta.
The agreement was with Optimum Mine, which is an
That
entity.
is the point.
Yes.
Because the money was not paid to Optimum, it was paid to Tegeta. So what agreement did Eskom have in place with Tegeta at that point?
The money was for the delivery of coal. The coal was delivered.
So, Mr. Molefe, that's your story and you're sticking to it. Because the question
Just as much as you're sticking to yours. So stick to your story and I'll stick to mine.
Fair enough, because I'm asking you about the agreement between Eskom and that entity called Tegeta.
You are very desperate to promote a particular narrative. But
to what end?
I don't know. Maybe you can tell me.
But Mr. Molefe,
I'm telling you
asking
that
you
we
a
bought
simple
coal,
question.
and the coal was delivered, and load shedding was
hear that.
averted.
I hear you talking about the fact that Eskom bought coal. Fair enough. But that's not the issue. The issue is who exactly Eskom bought that coal from. And I'm asking you about what the agreement was between Eskom and Tegeta contractually at that point. And by your own admission, you are saying Eskom did not have an agreement with Tegeta. They had an agreement for coal supply with Optimum. Yet Eskom paid money to Tegeta. Does that not sound strange?
No.
Not at all?
No.
So how do you pay an entity with whom you have not entered into an agreement?
But what was Tegeta's relationship with Optimum at the time?
That's besides the point, because the fact of the matter is, at that point, they had not yet concluded the takeover.
You can choose what's besides the point. Maybe we should move on to the next point, because I'm not hearing where you're going.
Mr. Molefe. Huh? We try to establish the facts in this regard. And you are here. You were the CEO at the time.
Yes.
And the reason why I'm asking you, in as much as other people may have been instrumental in, making sure that everything goes according to plan, the fact that that agreement, the ultimate payment was for more than 500 million rand means that it landed on your desk as the CEO at some point.
To do what?
For verification, because surely.
No, it
and
didn't.
What is the threshold? What is the threshold at Eskom?
No, it didn't. The transaction was approved by BTC, which is above me, at the meeting at which I was not present.
So
the transaction, the contracting of the transaction would have been led by the head of legal as well as the company secretary, right? I was not involved in that. I did not sign the agreements, right? Perhaps you should ask the head of legal whether they did the due diligence, or the company secretary, whether they did the due diligence about who is being paid and who's not being paid.
Suzanne Daniels was heavily fingered in this, but
yeah.
I'm asking you as the CEO at the time.
As the CEO, I know that coal was paid for and coal was received. Incidentally, I did not sign the agreements, nor did I approve the transaction. Right. So you say Suzanne Daniels was fingered. I do not know in what way she was fingered.
There are several reports again.
About Suzanne Daniels.
I don't know. Have you read any of the reports, Mr.
Why
Molefe?
are you barking at the wrong tree?
I'm not barking at the wrong tree. As I said, if you listen to me carefully, as I made that point, I said there are other people who would have been responsible. Yeah. But as the CEO, at some point, that agreement had to land on your desk.
And it was for the payment of coal, and the coal was received.
So let's talk. Let's take it further.
It was audited. There was internal audit and there was external audit. Was
due diligence done in this regard? Because as the CEO, I would imagine if you have plants breaking down because of substandard coal. This was the continuation
of an existing agreement that was entered into in December for the supply of coal, because Exxaro's contract was not renewed because their price was 1,400 or 1,300 that they wanted. And this was an agreement to supply coal at 400. And the coal was delivered.
So the end justifies the means, is what you're saying?
We did not load shed during that winter.
Fact.
Because we had coal.
We can't take that away. You're absolutely correct. But let's talk about whether the due diligence was done on the coal that was supplied.
On the coal that was supplied where? On that contract?
Yes.
When the coal gets delivered, there is a unit at Eskom that does coal quality checks. And my understanding is that that was done by the primary energy unit that checks the quality of the coal. So despite the fact that the mines that there was previously a penalty to Optimum regarding the quality of coal, you saying now that there was no problem with the quality of coal that was supplied? The penalty, Sakina, if you had researched properly, you would have known that the penalty was imposed 3 years before I even arrived. And when I arrived, my question was, why is the penalty not being followed up? Why is the money not being followed? And I could not get answers, and I insisted that they shall pay the penalty of 2 billion.
And I'm glad you say that, because it takes me precisely to that point, that Eskom was aware of the fact that there was previously substandard coal that was produced and delivered by
Glencore.
Optimum Mine, owned by Glencore at the time.
Yes.
So when you actually ask for further deliveries and even
Sakina,
greater quantities
the testing of the coal is an ongoing process. So every time they deliver the coal, they take a sample and they test it. So it's not like...
Was there a problem with the quality of coal supplied?
Not on that, not in May, June, July, August.
So when did the problem start with the quality of coal?
There was always a problem with quality. There were always penalties that were being imposed, like the Glencore penalty that had been imposed 3 months before.
So you've just contradicted yourself, Mr. Molefe. You said there's always been a problem with the quality of coal, and yet you say May, June, July, there was no problem. So either there was a problem with the quality of coal being delivered or there wasn't.
Sakina, with respect, I don't think that you are together today. I think that there is something wrong with you. Every day they test the quality of the coal. And sometimes, or most of the time, right through the years, there is always one problem or the other with the quality of the coal. So I'm talking about a generalized issue of problem with the quality of the coal that occurs as they are testing. Sometimes, or most of the time, there is no problem with the quality of the coal. But sometimes there is problem with the quality of the coal. Question is, in this particular instance, was there a problem with the quality of the coal? And the answer is, as far as I know, there wasn't.
Where were the combustion tests done?
At Eskom. We have laboratories that does the combustion tests. There was an issue, and the tests were taken to SABC for particular problems that we had. But the combustion tests are done at Eskom. We have laboratories for that. Sometimes they are outsourced as well.
Are the plants also expected to do their own combustion tests, the collieries, the mines that actually supply?
I suppose some of them are supposed to, but there is a specific unit in the primary energy section that does the tests.
There's a problem with water licenses at some of the mines. Were you aware of this?
When Tegeta got their contract to supply coal, there was a problem. They had a problem with the water license. The narrative out there is that I was there when we gave them that license. I wasn't. It happened before I arrived. We commissioned PricewaterhouseCoopers to check that contract and to say what the problems are with that contract. And they are the people that pointed out to these water license issues. We informed Treasury. They wrote in turn to us and said, please deal with these issues. After we had informed them, after we gave them the PricewaterhouseCoopers, and we dealt with every single one of those issues that were raised in the PricewaterhouseCoopers.
They also raised the issue of the combustion
was ventilated at the committee, at the Public Enterprises Committee, and later on at SCOPA. You probably have the footage, but you've never looked at it. But we pointed out exactly what I'm telling you now.
The PricewaterhouseCoopers report did point out the water license issue.
It was
did point out the fact that they did not have the requisite combustion
was commissioned by Eskom, by
test
us.
unit. I know this.
Yeah, and we followed up and dealt with every single one of the issues that they raised.
The question is, why was Tegeta doing business with Eskom when they hadn't met the threshold in compliance for those things?
They signed that contract before I arrived. Before I arrived.
When was what was the date of that contract?
I think March.
March of?
15.
So that's literally a month before you arrived.
Yes.
And because you started in April 2015.
Yes.
So which is quite interesting. It just in the sense that no. I'm saying it's interesting in the sense that when the Glencore agreement, when you decided not to indulge Glencore in what they were asking in terms of the renegotiation. I agree with you. I said it.
I have no regrets about it, and I don't understand why everybody thinks that they had an entitlement to that increase in the price.
No, they didn't. And I agree with you. You were correct on Glencore as far as I'm concerned. But, you know, I'm just looking at the timeline in terms of what you're saying when that agreement was signed with Tegeta.
Yeah.
Because you're saying it's before your time, and yet you were instrumental in making sure that the Glencore amendment was not signed.
So when was the Glencore agreement signed?
I'm trying to think. That's why I'm trying to figure the timeline.
When was the Glencore agreement signed?
That's what I'm asking, because
Let me tell you when it was
timeline.
signed. 30 years before, 2018.
Yeah, but we're talking about the amendment now.
It was a 30-year agreement.
We're talking about that amendment, the fourth amendment.
The amendment happened 3 years before the contract expired.
But the one that when you came in,
yeah,
Glencore were in conversation, in consultation with Eskom.
About increasing the price.
Exactly.
Yes.
So
and they said
what was the date when you...
They were about to do the deal, right?
Yes. What
and
was
I
the
said
date
no.
for that? What was the date when you turned them down?
There was no specific date. This discussion happened over months.
But
I turned them down several times. I think when I arrived, the matter had just been to the board. And the board had said the matter must go to the CEO, either when I arrived or just after I arrived. And
so
then,
at that point...
And then I looked at the agreement, and I didn't do anything about it. And they requested meetings. And finally, we had a meeting in May. And I said to them in their face, we are not signing the agreement.
That was in May.
So what is the significance of that date, if I may ask?
No, I'm just checking with regard to the coal supply agreement.
It doesn't fit with your narrative.
No. I'm checking dates and timelines because...
But what's the significance? I don't understand.
Because of the agreement entered into with Tegeta. Because Tegeta, they actually acquired Optimum Mine, which was previously owned by Glencore.
The reason Tegeta acquired Optimum Mine is because Glencore sold it to them.
At what point? What was the date?
Oh, yeah. Glencore is trying to say that they sold the mine because I refused with the increase. Right? Which is not true. I had to refuse with the increase. And now they are saying, okay, fine, we'll show him. We'll sell this mine to the Guptas so that he can become a Gupta person, so that we can show that he is captured. And they did.
So you were framed, you say?
Who approved the transaction? The banks. They were the creditors of Optimum. They sat with the creditors, and the creditors agreed that the mine must be sold to Tegeta. The transaction went to the Competition Commission. It was approved there.
Some say in record time.
Suddenly, Molefe is the bastard that approved the transaction. It's not true. What I did not approve was the increase in the price, period.
So were you framed in this regard?
I'm not saying I was framed. Those were your words. I'm not saying I was framed. I'm just saying that those are the facts.
We're going to take a break to go to the news, and then we'll come back because Mr. Molefe says, you know, he may have some suggestion as to how to help with the load shedding problem that we currently face. So do stay with us here on Morning Live.